My wife had an affair with her pastor, so I sat front row at church, played the footage on the projector, and walked out during communion. I'm a 33-year-old man, and I used to believe faith was the foundation of love. Not just a part of it, the foundation. The first time I met Clara, she was standing outside the youth ministry center with a Bible in one hand and a tray of homemade cookies in the other. She had this softness about her, like she didn't belong to the chaos of the world. She smiled at me like I was someone worth praying for. We started dating not long after. Our early conversations were filled with scripture, dreams of mission trips, and talks about building a home centered around Christ. She'd pray before meals, leave little notes in my lunchbox that said things like, "Love is patient. Love is kind." The kind of woman you'd be proud to bring home to your mother. We got married in the same church we met in, under the guidance of Reverend James. He'd been like a father to both of us. He officiated our wedding with tears in his eyes, calling us a covenant made in heaven. I remember gripping Clara's hands as she whispered, "This is our ministry now." She dove deeper into church life after we got married, volunteering, leading women's prayer circles, even helping Reverend James with sermon outlines. I was proud, genuinely proud. Not many men could say their wife loved God more than attention. Sometimes she'd stay late, saying the church needed cleaning or that James was struggling with sermon structure. I didn't question it. How could I? When someone tells you they're serving God, you don't assume they're lying. And besides, she was so devout, so dedicated. I thought we were the lucky ones. I thought faith made us unbreakable. But looking back, I missed the first crack. It wasn't in her smile. It was in how she always sat in the front pew, closer to the pulpit than to me. In the beginning, it felt like a blessing. We weren't just husband and wife. We were partners in purpose. Every weekend was devoted to something at the church. Organizing charity drives, leading prayer breakfasts, hosting Bible study in our living room with trays of banana bread. Clara insisted on baking from scratch. People would say, "You two are a shining example of a godly marriage." I believed it. I needed to believe it. In a world full of chaos and temptation, we were building something sacred, something the world couldn't touch. Reverend James loved to hold us up as an example during sermons. "These two," he'd say, "live in obedience." And when Clara beamed under the praise, I beamed with her, but slowly, the balance started to shift. She started volunteering more, staying after services to help prep for next week, or counsel younger women. Sometimes she wouldn't get home until after 10 p.m. She always smelled like the church. Candle wax and old hymn. Books, but with a new scent layered underneath. Something floral, expensive, not hers. When I asked if she was doing too much, she smiled and said, "God needs laborers, not spectators," I laughed, pretending not to feel like a spectator in my own marriage. Then came the day she skipped our anniversary dinner because the pastor had an emergency board meeting. She left me sitting at the restaurant with a gift box under my arm. I watched the candles burn low until the waiter cleared the table with a sympathetic look. I went home, heated leftovers, and left her slice of cake in the fridge. She didn't touch it. That night, I asked her if everything was okay. She didn't answer, just kissed my forehead and said, "Pray with me, not against me." And that's when I realized I was starting to feel like a third wheel in my own marriage. It wasn't a sudden fall, it was erosion, quiet, gradual, like something sacred decaying behind stained glass. Gray stopped asking me to pray with her. She started locking her phone, said it was to protect prayer group confidences. She began pulling away physically too, saying she was fasting from intimacy to strengthen her spirit. I didn't fight it. I told myself this was just a phase, a spiritual season. We all go through them, right? But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was watching her drift further and further from me, and closer to something, or someone, else. One night, while brushing her hair in front of the mirror, she said, "Reverend James thinks I have a gift, a spiritual sensitivity. He says women like me are rare." I forced a smile. "You are rare." She didn't look up, just kept brushing her hair and said, "He understands things you wouldn't get." I barely slept that night. Over the next few weeks, she'd come home humming hymns I hadn't heard before. She started wearing heels to church, applying red lipstick she never used to wear, said it made her feel bold for the Lord. I started to feel like a visitor in my own home. Her affection turned into politeness. Her eyes, once soft and filled with light when they looked at me, were now distant, like she was scanning a sermon while I spoke. One Sunday, I reached for her hand during worship. She pulled it away and whispered, "Not now. I'm trying to listen." The music roared around me, but I couldn't hear anything except the silence between us. And then came the call. Late one night, as she showered, her phone buzzed. A message lit up the screen. "Your spirit ignites me." I froze. The sender's name was just 2 letters. JRI stared at the message like it had thorns. "Your spirit ignites me." Those 4 words kept repeating in my head like a hymn turned cruel. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't have to. The moment I saw the contact initials, JR, something inside me broke. Not loud. Not angry, just shattered. When Clara stepped out of the shower, wrapped in a towel, steam curling around her like smoke from an altar, she looked peaceful. Holy, even. I wanted to scream. Instead, I asked softly, "Who's JR?" She paused. Just a beat. Then blinked like she hadn't expected the question. "Oh, just someone from the worship team." She said it with a tone so casual, so dismissive I almost believed her. But her eyes flickered, left, then right. Like a deer watching for wolves, I nodded. Didn't push. I knew better than to interrogate someone who'd already decided not to tell the truth. The next day, I watched her from the kitchen window as she loaded her car with food trays for youth group night. She looked beautiful, composed, like nothing was wrong. She drove off, and for the first time in our marriage, I followed her. I stayed a few cars back. Watched as she pulled into the side lot of the church. I parked around the corner. Waited. 10 minutes later, Reverend James's car pulled in beside hers. He got out. No Bible in hand. No sermon notes. Just him, smiling too warmly, walking too closely. They didn't go into the chapel. They slipped into the back office. She touched his arm. He closed the door behind them. I stood there in my car, hands trembling around the steering wheel, breath caught in my throat like a prayer I couldn't finish. I didn't cry. I didn't curse. I pulled out my phone, opened the camera, and whispered, "God, forgive me for what I'm about to do." I parked just close enough to catch what I needed, hidden in the shadows near the side entrance. The church looked different at night. Less holy, more hollow. The stained glass didn't glow. The cross on the roof looked tired. I crept toward the back, staying low by the hedges. My heart wasn't pounding. It was steady, focused, cold. A small office window was cracked open, just enough to let air in. Or sound out. I held up my phone and hit record. At first there was just muffled talking. Laughter. Her laugh. The same laugh she used to make when I tickled her feet under our bed sheets. Then silence. Then gasps. Rustling. A thud. A low moan. My stomach turned, but my hand stayed steady. I didn't need to see everything. I just needed the truth. A minute later, I pulled away. That was all I could take. I didn't want proof anymore. I wanted to forget. But forgetting doesn't come easy when the person who taught you how to pray is the one gutting your soul. I drove home in silence. No music, no rage, just this ringing in my ears, like my heartbeat had relocated to my skull. Clara came home 2 hours later, said she lost track of time, smelled like cinnamon and lavender, smiled like nothing was broken. She kissed my cheek and asked if I'd brush the dog. I nodded. I think I even smiled back, because in that moment I knew she wasn't just cheating on me. She was doing it in the name of God. And he, Reverend James, wasn't just a pastor. He was preaching by day and sinning by night, and I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a man with a camera, a file, and a decision to make. I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, eyes open, watching the ceiling fan spin in slow, mocking circles. Clara was next to me, breathing softly, her body wrapped in the same blanket we picked out on our honeymoon trip to the mountains. I stared at her back and wondered how long she'd been lying to me in that same position, how many nights she came home from him and curled into me. By morning, I felt like a ghost. I poured her coffee. She kissed my cheek. I said nothing. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal. I kept telling myself to be calm, be smart. You only get one shot at this, but pretending made me feel like I was dying in pieces. When I did finally confront her, I kept my voice steady. "Clara, is there something you want to tell me?" She blinked. "About what?" "You and Reverend James." Her face didn't change. Not fear, not guilt, just cold annoyance. "You're being paranoid," she said, brushing past me. "He's a man of God. You're letting your insecurities twist things." She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just made me feel like I was the sinner. Later that week, I sat through another Sunday service. Reverend James spoke on the sin of suspicion. He said, "The devil creeps in through doubt. He makes you see betrayal where there's just burden." People nodded. Some glanced at me. Clara was in the front row. She nodded the hardest. I felt the bile rise in my throat. This wasn't just betrayal. It was performance. They were rewriting the truth in front of a crowd that clapped for it. I left early, hands clenched, chest tight, and that's when it hit me. They weren't hiding. They didn't need to hide. Because in that church, no one questions the pulpit. The Sunday that broke me started like any other. Warm coffee, pressed shirt, forced smile. Clara asked if I was okay, and I told her I was just tired. She nodded like she didn't care to dig deeper. The sanctuary was packed. Communion Sunday always drew a crowd. People dressed a little nicer. The choir sang a little louder. Reverend James took the pulpit and announced the sermon title with a grin. When Loyalty is Tested. My breath caught. Clara reached for my hand. I didn't move. He spoke with fire, pacing, shouting, quoting scripture about betrayal and disobedience. But his eyes never left me. "The enemy uses those closest to us to plant seeds of doubt," he said, voice rising. "He whispers lies in the ears of good men, and sometimes those men let it rot their homes." The crowd was silent. Then, like sheep obeying a crook, they nodded. Some looked toward me, some with confusion, others with pity. Clara didn't just nod. She teared up. I looked at her and wondered if I'd actually gone insane, if maybe I had made it all up, maybe I'd twisted shadows into sin. But no. I had footage. I had facts. And yet, somehow, in that moment, I felt like the villain. I walked out before the sermon ended. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in. I drove to the nearest gas station, parked behind the building, and finally let myself fall apart. I cried until my throat ached, slammed the steering wheel until my hands bruised. I screamed at the windshield, "Why me? Why now? What did I do to deserve this?" But the only answer was the silence that followed. And that's when I realized I wasn't just heartbroken. I was erased. After that breakdown, something inside me shifted. Not healed, hardened. I stopped trying to save my marriage, stopped questioning my worth. I stopped praying for answers and started preparing for action. If they were going to perform their betrayal like a sermon, then I would answer like a storm. I began with small steps. Downloaded data from Clara's old iPad she never used anymore. It was still linked to her cloud. The photos didn't shock me. Her and Reverend James in the church office, in the parking lot, even in the sanctuary after hours. Smiling, holding hands. But what made my blood freeze wasn't the affair. It was the money. Buried in a folder labeled Missions Planning were spreadsheets, donation logs, expenses marked for community outreach, thousands of dollars traced to personal accounts. One of them had Clara's name on it. She wasn't just sleeping with him. She was stealing with him. From the same people who hugged her every Sunday, from widows who tithed their pensions, from teenagers who scraped together lunch money to drop in the offering plate. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was fraud. I backed everything up: photos, messages, transfers, screenshots. I created a folder and titled it Truth Untitled. Now, I didn't just have motive, I had evidence, but I wasn't going to the police. Not yet. No, because they didn't deserve quiet accountability. They deserved judgment, and I knew exactly where it would happen. The one place they felt untouchable: the sanctuary. During Communion Sunday, I reached out to Caleb, the quiet tech guy who ran slides and projector screens at church. Told him I wanted to surprise Clara with a video tribute next week. Our anniversary was coming up after all. He smiled and said, "Of course, man. Everyone could use some joy these days." I smiled back, but mine wasn't kind. The week leading up to Communion was the quietest I'd ever been. Not out of peace, out of calculation. Clara didn't notice, or maybe she thought she'd already broken me so completely that I had nothing left to say. I kissed her goodbye each morning, watched her put on that crimson lipstick she wore only on Sundays. She hummed hymns while packing her bag. She had no idea the hymns would soundtrack her downfall. At night, I edited the footage, overlaid scripture passages about purity and honesty with clips of her slipping into the pastor's arms. I slowed the footage just enough to burn the images into memory. Her laugh, his smirk, the stained glass reflection on their skin. I included screenshots of donation theft, each transfer labeled, time-stamped, cross-referenced with church event dates. I set it all to soft piano music, background worship chords, almost poetic, almost cruel. The final slide was simple. This was never about faith. It was about control. Saturday evening, I tested the file on a thumb drive. It worked perfectly on my home projector. At the church, I met Caleb in the AV room. I handed him the drive. He nodded, slid it into the queue for special tribute video, anniversary. "Want it to play after Communion?" he asked. I looked at him steady. Exactly then, right after the blessing. "Got it," he smiled. "She's gonna love it." Oh, she would feel something. But it wouldn't be love. That night, I laid next to her in bed one final time. She murmured, "You've been quiet lately." "I think your heart's softening," I whispered back. "Yeah, I think you're right." She fell asleep, smiling, and I stared at the ceiling, counting the hours until everything they built on lies came crashing down. I woke up that Sunday with a calm I hadn't felt in months. It wasn't peace. It was purpose. I dressed slowly, buttoning my shirt with deliberate hands, smelling the starch and cologne like armor. Clara looked radiant in the front row, hair done, lips the same cruel red. Reverend James stood at the pulpit like a king about to knight his court. The service flowed like a river. Hymns swelled. People leaned in as if the walls themselves might lean back to listen. I sat in the very front, third pew, where you could see the communion table and the projector in one sweeping glance. Heart steady, thumbs folded, breath measured. I felt every eye on me and every prayer in the room like static. When the time for communion came, Reverend James began the blessing, his voice a practiced velvet, hands raised. The choir softened. The deacon rolled the cart of chalices down the center aisle. People stood, kneeling, crossing themselves. The world outside narrowed to the soft clink of glasses. Caleb gave me the nod from the AV booth. I nodded back. The screen flickered once, like a throat clearing. Then the lights dimmed and the projector hummed. At first it seemed like the slideshow of church life, smiling faces, potlucks, mission trips. A few people smiled. Then the images shifted. The piano music I'd chosen swelled under everything. Gentle, almost tender. The footage hit. Clara's laugh in a sunlit office. The pastor's hand on her back as they leaned into the same shadowed doorway. Screenshots of transaction records, lines of numbers and church names, red arrows, timestamps. The words I'd placed at the top of the slide. This was never about faith. It was about control. A woman behind me gasped. Somewhere, a child started to cry. Reverend James froze mid-blessing, lips still forming a prayer that never found an end. Clara's grip on the communion cup slackened. It clinked and fell. A small sacrament shattered on the aisle carpet. She looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize. Betrayal, fury, the deer-in-headlights of a performer finally seen. I stood. My voice sounded calm, even to my own ears. "Forgive me, Father," I said, and the room went quiet as if the ceiling itself had paused to listen. For I believed in false prophets. I turned toward the main doors and walked out, as the first shout cut through the hymn, and the church rose like a storm behind me. By Monday morning, the footage had already been uploaded. Someone had recorded the projector with their phone. 10,000 views before noon. By the end of the week, it was all over local Christian forums, gossip pages, and Facebook groups titled things like "Exposing Wolves in the Church." The church board met on Wednesday and issued a statement. Reverend James was being suspended pending internal investigation. By Friday, he'd disappeared from social media completely. No sermons, no statements, just silence. Clara packed her things the day after the fallout. No confrontation, no screaming. She didn't even try to explain. Just cried quietly as she filled a single suitcase and whispered, "You ruined everything." I almost laughed. Ruined what? The illusion. The theater of sanctity they performed. On that stage while robbing hearts and wallets behind it? She moved in with her sister, someone who never liked me to begin with. Clara posted some vague Instagram story about being emotionally manipulated by a powerful man, probably hoping people would see her as a victim. But it didn't land. People saw. I got messages from church members. Some were furious. "You embarrassed the entire congregation." Others were raw and grateful. One woman said her husband had been giving hundreds to the church even while they struggled to pay rent. Another said she always had a strange feeling about Reverend James but never had proof. I responded to no one. Not out of pride, out of peace. For the first time in over a year, I could breathe without second-guessing myself. I could sleep through the night without wondering if the bed beside me still belonged to a stranger. I didn't go back to that church. I didn't need to. But sometimes I'd drive by it, watching the empty parking lot, the cracked sign out front, the silence hanging heavier than any sermon ever did. And my only regret was how long I let blind faith drown out the screaming truth. It's been 8 months since that Sunday. The church never recovered. A few loyalists tried to keep it going, new guest pastors, open prayer nights, but the spirit was gone. Empty pews replaced packed aisles. Donations dried up. The building was recently listed for sale, price negotiable. I never went back. Not even once. Instead, I found a small community chapel across town. No projector, no worship band, just folding chairs, chipped walls, and quiet people with honest eyes. It wasn't performance. It was peace. I started seeing a therapist, too. The first few sessions felt pointless, like I was wasting my breath. But eventually, I admitted things I never could before. That I stayed silent because I wanted to be the good man. That I mistook manipulation for faith. That I wasn't. Just betrayed. I was rewritten by people who used Scripture like a weapon. And once I said it out loud, it started to lose power. A few weeks ago, I got an email. The subject line, "I hope we can talk." It was from Clara. She wrote long paragraphs about guilt, about how she wasn't herself and fell under influence. She quoted verses about forgiveness and healing, said she's attending therapy now, that she hopes I can find it in my heart to see her pain too. I read the first few lines. Then I hit delete. Not out of hate, out of clarity. Some things are meant to stay unfinished. I'm in a new apartment now. Smaller, quieter. There's no cross above my door, but there's truth in every room. I still believe in God, just not in the ones who tried to impersonate Him. And if you asked me what I learned from all this, I'd say this. Faith is sacred, but trust must be earned.